Dang. Okay. And we'll just jump right in and I'll edit.
We're live, Tommy.
Oh.
I just hit the button. Watch the screen. We'll try again.
I was waiting for the...
So this may be a secondary stream that's going to be spun up here now because of some technical difficulties. Something happened and the connection was lost. All right. Well, I rambled for like 5 minutes while trying to kill some dead air while we were figuring out what's going on. We'll take out a moment here just to see if things are going to be able to light up. Do we see it on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we are back up.
All right, we're back up. All right, so we'll start over again. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike.
July 4th. Okay.
July 4th happened. All right, great. Moving on. All right, let's jump into this episode again for the second time here. Trying to talk through what are domains, what are roles, and has the technology for Fabric changed where that data engineer individual will live? Does that individual now need to live in the central BI team, or is it actually now going to live more in the business area? I think the argument, we kind of had a couple main talking points from the end of our last episode, 229, just trying to think through what are domains, but the conversation really went off a rabbit trail around roles and access to things.
And I think it's been a long time coming to get to this particular conversation with Fabric. For those who've been subscribers and followers, we've been talking a lot about all the mechanics, the different parts of Fabric, kind of diving into our sweet spot, so to speak, on the implications of it. But I think there's a logical point here for us to really focus on now with Fabric, who really is going to own what, both from ideal world of, if we were to have all the resources, but what's going to be this compromise for what are resources and budgets and departments willing to do and what's going to work, because we are in also a very large unknown. This is one of the spaces none of us can say, oh, I've done this before, like with this technology.
People can say closer than others, right? So Fabric, using the bits and clicking the buttons of Fabric, I would say no.
Right.
But what Fabric is doing is not revolutionary. So, a lake house, building common life, so the technology is, in my opinion, Microsoft's just now catching up to a lot of other data platforms,
right?
Like Snowflake and Databricks. But they've already been doing this for years. Microsoft is now part of it, centralizing the tools,
part of it,
right?
Because they had it in Azure, right? You could have built the same architecture in Azure.
I might not have the access. Now the consumer can also be in the same place or a contributor and also do the data engineering.
So that's my point, though. My point is that those capabilities are now in the same tool, which is what Synapse. Yeah. So Synapse and Blob Storage was supposed to be that thing, but you needed an Azure subscription, and then IT was like, "No, we're not going to give it to you."
And that's what I'm saying.
Yes. And now here we are.
There's not like they've also introduced a completely new technology here. It's just
that's a good point.
Access,
the availability of it. Well, so
right.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe
in the same. Okay, so there's one thing that you said is like, oh, they didn't build anything new here, and I would disagree from the standpoint that would you have said the same thing about Power BI? Absolutely not. Okay. Did they utilize tools and technologies they already had to combine them into a different offering? Mm-hmm. Is that what Fabric is? Mm-hmm. Right. So because of that, I think it opens up. If it wasn't an interesting new business intelligence, tool set or method or ways in which opens up access to a much wider audience in the way that they have, we wouldn't be talking about it as much.
We wouldn't have the logo stamped on our wallpaper. So that's true.
So I agree, right? It's not necessary. There are enhancements to certain areas. The long-term vision, I think, starts to knit all of these things together. So maybe, Mike, I kind of agree with you now, but not it. I think breaking down the walls of not having to build all those services and knit them all together, opens up the doors for this conversation where we're saying, hey, you know what? Business units could own all of this, even though technically they do, but they're using different tools in various forms in many different applications or third-party tools or whatever the case may be.
True.
To solve the same problems that could be unified or can be unified now through Fabric.
That's a great point you make there, because I'm gonna dovetail on that. There are other third-party tools that do data engineering and give the business control of those data engineering activities. I'm thinking one of them is Talend. Talend is a
Sure.
data engineering tool. It helps you
How m-
shape data.
AltriX.
How many?
Alteryx is another one.
Yeah. How many third-party drag and drop ETL
Yeah,
tools are there out there that
exactly.
the business uses?
Exactly right.
Ton.
Yeah. And I think the business is using them and paying for them already. And when you think about, I mean, if I think about the data engineering or the data ecosystem, the most expensive thing right now in the data ecosystem is the people. The labor to make things happen is the most expensive element of the data engineering. So if you think about like Power BI Premium, you can get premium for $5,000 a month. If you're hiring a data engineer, you're probably looking at double that just on a monthly basis for one data engineer for one business unit. So the expense of that is much higher, I think.
And if we think about our people, process, technology philosophy here, the big difference here and the big impact is the fact that now it's all in the same stream. If you in other departments had your own software, your own tools, your own login, your own budget, it was basically like a see no evil, hear no evil. If I didn't know what that other department was doing, I think there's a big difference now bringing it all into the same stream, that it's all going to be within Fabric. It can be viewed by multiple more people, and that's going to affect, I think, the process. That's going to affect the way
Could
people are
be.
doing things. Yeah.
Could be viewed, but not necessarily. There are absolutely opportunities for being siloed in here.
Oh, yeah.
So when we say who owns what, are we saying like who owns what in the Fabric realm?
I think there's a couple of places to talk about who's owning what objects, right? One is a challenge I think we talked about in the last episode, 229, was really focusing on, okay, who are the people that are owning the workspace, right? And I think we kind of clearly aligned on there's never really a clear ownership, or organizations are not putting in governance that says we need one or two admins, we need one or two members, and here's what those roles are, and here's what they should be doing. The majority of people working in a workspace are contributors, people making content. So I think in that context, one, that's a weakness. I think in many organizations are not really putting thought around what are those roles and training their people to be able to create those roles appropriately. Where I see things potentially being more effective here is central BI is more of the governing body around central BI is that governing body that decides, okay, you need a workspace, request it from us. We'll get you the workspace. Oh, and by the way, here's the resource groups that you're going to have. And make sure you identify who is the owner of this workspace. When there's something goes wrong, if the data quality is incorrect, if there's something weird going on there, we need someone to go back to and to really push on to fix the things. And I think at that point in time, you're really talking about this federated center of excellence. Now, again, this is a very generalized world that we're looking at here, just because I think if you look at different industries, certain ones are regulated more highly than others. And so in certain cases, you need more regulation or more control coming from that central BI team in a regulated space.
So the heart of our conversation that we ended on Tuesday was about, does the business own the engineering, the ETL, their data, or is that going to come from the center, to your point, the centralized BI team? And I think that that conversation really opens up now because of Fabric, if a company completely adopts it, because the fact that you have everything accessible in one place.
Yes.
And I think, to me, when as I think about this conversation, I've been trying to go back and forth or see both sides of this, because again, this is very new territory for all of us. I would still lean on the BI side, just because I think for a big part of this is you're going to have to invest a lot of resources if you were to have the business do this, on the business understanding the technology, the business investing in the right process. And my questions that come up is, do they need to follow the same process as other departments? Is there a universal set of principles that need to be followed throughout the organization?
So you asked a lot of questions. So I'm going to try and break down your questions.
Thinking about a lot of questions. Yes.
I know you are. So let's focus on one question at a time, Tommy. So let's go in the first one, right? Will there need to be, I think I got them all right here. Will there be a centralized pattern by which every department should do their engineering? I think there should be. I think there should be something, and that should be coming from the Center of Excellence. That should be decided upon by those individuals that are saying, okay, this is how we're going to go to market with our data. And I do think in order to make the business effective, there needs to be a clear handoff between when the central BI team is developing tables and things out of their central BI space, and then saying, here's what we're willing to provide you. We're either willing to provide you a full report, a data set, or a table. And I think as you work your way down towards the table level, you're giving the business more control to shape the data however they are. Now, at that point in time, whatever happens to that data beyond that step, that's where I think the governance and the administration stuff really kicks in here, because when you start handing that responsibility over to a business unit, it's up to them to verify and check their numbers. It's up to them to have ownership around those things. So go ahead.
So I'm getting lost a little bit, right? In general descriptions of what governance, central BI team, and the relationship that exists today. Because when we talk about, or at least when I think about how that would be structured in an organization, that is with champions, right? Who are business people who know how to do some reporting. If all of the sudden Fabric is opening up this door for like heavier ETL, heavier implementation patterns, like engineering work, is your expectation that those champions are going to learn all that? Or where we started the conversation, are we supposed to pull people from the central BI team and give them to business units to support the business unit? Or are you talking additional resources need to be invested in every business unit because we don't have the levels of expertise in there?
Okay, this is good questions. So I think when you're talking about a Power BI champion, I think you're already looking at an individual who already understands a lot of the core concepts around what data engineering things are required, right? You're already learning data engineering when you're doing Power Query. You're shaping tables, you're moving things around, you're getting the basics of what, how to make that star schema model for that champion. And hopefully, again, this is another thing that I would kind of lean on. The Center of Excellence is expected to identify those champions and continue to educate, groom, help them build better models and things inside that space. So I think that is purely a Center of Excellence role that is trying to facilitate, grow the data culture as that user is part of the community practice. What I think is going to happen here is I think you're going to find the IT budgets are going to continue to shrink. There's going to be less funding for that central team in general. But what will happen is the users or the individuals that are going to be those sharp, either call them Power BI champions or maybe call them, that data analyst, the person who used to be doing the data modeling and the report building. I think that person, that candidate, will start learning either on their own or with company guidance or from the Center of Excellence. They're going to start learning more data engineering practices. So we're going to introduce GitHub or Git to them. We're going to introduce more design around star schemas. They're going to learn more about DAX. I'm hoping that individuals continually hungry to learn more things, and those candidates become, right? So now I have these two personas, the data analyst, which would be modeler and report builder, and I have this data engineer, and I see those as like a Venn diagram, and all I'm seeing is those diagrams are there's a larger overlap between the two elements now, because the tool doesn't require me to know how to set up and configure Synapse or SQL or whatever. I just get notebooks and SQL and data flows Gen 2 by default. Okay. So now you have this role that's going to be kind of evolving into the business unit. And I think it's going to be a little bit of both. Some of your champions will become data engineering. And I think the business unit, when justified by the cost, if they need to go faster with their data, they will go find talent that meets that need.
So you just said less funding for the central team.
I think that central BI team is going to get less funding, so it's going to become thinner.
So the BI team, who within the organization, any organization at the moment, is the team that knows how to work across all these business units, has all of the technical knowledge of all of these back-end systems, who manages these data sets, certifies them, does the extended leadership reporting, are the modelers, are the performance tuners, are the trainers, and the supporters of champions, is going to get neutered. And you're going to just expect that business users who know how to use Power BI are going to elevate into engineering roles.
I mean, I see it all the time. I see
ambitious at best.
I see a lot of people in that engineering role taking on a lot more responsibility and becoming that is a very common, I think, from the organizations that I've worked with or seen, there is a number of people who are ambitious, like to learn, love their data space, and they start out as, I'm just building a handful of Power BI reports. Then they get effective at that, and then they start managing workspaces, and then they start becoming that Power BI administrator. And so now they have more area in that space, in that BI realm. And then eventually what happens is a career change at some point happens, and they move out of what they've been doing, building reports for a single team, and move more towards this center of excellence space.
Mike, you're literally talking about a Microsoft MVP, which there are 200 in our space. Think about the grow up story of just someone who gets into Power BI accidentally. Their best practices around, even if they're learning data engineering, they're not learning best practices. They're just usually the majority of what I've seen is they're flying by the seat of their pants, and they're not applying the best. Yeah. And
that's a newer, younger user of Power BI.
Yeah, I got you.
But you let that user sit there for 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5. So what you're saying though is, and this is where
you've already got a lot of people. You've already got a lot of people in Power BI who've already been using for Power BI has been out for 9 years.
They're not doing engineering.
It's not the same as an engineer who knows Spark, who knows Lakehouse, who knows any of the things that are like here. Even in the MVP realm or professional BI people within Power BI, when you start talking about Parquet and Lakehouse and Spark clusters and they don't know anything about that. They don't, and they're learning it.
Yeah,
but they're also coming at it with years of technical experience. You're suggesting that a company is going to morph into Fabric over 3 to 5 years, and so many of these people are going to come out of the woodwork that they're going to know and understand how to utilize this ecosystem.
Okay, you're acting like these people are just going to discover themselves. I think no. I think it has to be led by the central team. This is something.
But here's my point. This is my pushback. You're saying in one hand, the central BI team is going to teach them, and then at the same time, we're going to start eliminating the central BI team because we don't need them anymore.
Yeah, IT. IT is going to be, so if you think about central BI and IT, so there's a couple of things that are being managed right now.
It is not the same thing.
Well, then I don't know what your definition is then, because I think that whole center role of making data models for individuals, what we're seeing the trend of what previously was happening was all the technology pieces were inside a central BI team, and all that was coming out was SSRS reports, or here's a cube that is produced by business objects.
How would you describe a central BI team today? I guess maybe this is a two-part question. It appears that there's two sorts of BI teams that you have in mind. One is this old school IT.
Yes.
Like the owners of the data.
Yes.
You don't get access to anything that comes out of a warehouse.
Here's your SSRS reports. Here's reports given to you.
I would love an audience poll. Do you guys live in this environment? Because I haven't seen that in a while. But I would agree with you if a central data team is holding and restricting back all of the data within an organization, then neuter them. But that's not the team that's going to be talking, doing training, doing adoption, doing COE, doing all these new adoption strategies of data within an organization. Because that's not if you live in a team like that or an organization, they're not going to be the ones doing that or promoting that.
It's it would be a very large mistake to say that the same audience that loves Power BI or has adopted that is also going to be purely become engineers. The reason why Power BI and the adoption of the builders is because I can do this little ETL. I can build these calculations, and I can build visuals. I get to do all three. That has been such part of the adoption because of the personality. You may like one more than the other. If all of a sudden you think you're going to find that many people first just to get introduced now to the medallion approach and data engineering, which is much more intimidating the first time that you see that than Power BI ever was, because guess what?
Yep.
You're not just dealing with a simple Excel table or CSV. There's a lot more knowledge, and or forget what notebooks and pipelines you're going to introduce compared to 5 minutes to wow, the different products. There's a big difference in terms of the audience and people who are going to be willing to invest their time into that too.
I agree with you, but I'm not saying it's not going to start happening. The organizations. So let's talk about just general trends here,
Sure.
right? General trends, right? Are organizations looking to make more money, or are organizations looking to put more money into centralized teams? I think in some organizations the answer is yes, but I would say in most often, more organizations are trying to move money away from centralized shared services and into profit loss centers, where each business unit can then create a revenue, and then from that revenue take out their expenses, right? So I see the central BI team as being this shared common expense across the organization. Organizations that I've been in or been working with, they're usually looking to minimize those overhead costs, those large central teams, and bring down those costs. So not talking about people or headcount. I'm just talking purely financial pieces.
Costs, right?
I'm
Because
also
engineers cost money.
and so the other side of this is, okay, if I have a business unit, a sales team, an HR team, whatever those teams are having a certain level of funding. So depending on the team that you're in, that team will likely generate a revenue stream. And I think what's going to happen is, with the addition of Fabric, we're seeing a shift in organizations that can actually apply more cost into a business unit or an area of the business that is generating revenue more so than a shared function team. So I think generally what's happening is the technology. But previously you had to rely on a central team because there was hard walls or gates between the data and the machines that you were able to touch. It was on-prem. It wasn't in the cloud. We didn't have a whole bunch of cloud-based services. The business unit couldn't choose which tools they were using, so they're forced to use some central tool that was generated for them. But now with the proliferation of third-party tools, everything being cloud, you can buy Salesforce in the cloud, you can buy NetSuite in the cloud, or all these cloud-based services. I think what has happened is the business unit has now made the decision with all these third-party tools that they're going to acquire, they're going to manage their own profit and loss. And what will happen is the cost will shift from that central BI team into business units that are generating revenues. Now, would you agree with that trend?
I agree with the trend, but what I don't agree with is the mixing of these two things, right? I think we are in agreement from the standpoint that Fabric, the workspaces, the domains, everything within this ecosystem actually aligns with this strategy to allow business units to manage their own spaces and be the owners of their data, right?
Correct.
So do I think business units should own their own work streams? Yeah. Does that mean that there are opportunities for people within those business units to elevate into these much more engineering specific roles? Yeah. Are they probably already, or like, are some business units already doing some of this through other
Yes.
third-party tools? Yes.
100%.
So is there a way for them to manage their own space? 100%. Yes. And probably easier in this ecosystem of domains and workspaces.
Mhm.
But you take that and now you start disintegrating what I like. That is not the same thing in my mind as centralized initiatives that a new BI team, a centralized BI team, should be managing. Because that, like, what you just threw in was all these business units are all going to have their own people that do these things. And what happened, like, they're just collectively going to live in a utopia of meetings and have other priorities outside their business units that are central BI.
It's going to be like herding
And
cats.
how to,
I'm not talking about like it's going to be like herding cats. It already is today. I'm saying it's going to happen. Like I'm not saying it's the right way all the time, but I'm saying the trend here is that will happen.
But-
There will be
okay,
more
so-
skills in those business units.
This is where I'm falling apart with you.
Yeah.
The reason I was trying to make a distinction between what you're saying centralized BI is, which
Yes.
is a old standard of IT controlling all of the data. That is not what a central BI team is in my mind right now.
I think we're just talking about different definitions, because I think your definition of what
A
it should be
BI team
is
a
where I'm
BI
thinking it's
team
going.
that is very technical in nature, that can solve all of the problems that we talk about for 230 episodes, right? Are not business people problems that they can solve, because it's not their area. They're not technical experts, right? It requires a team to work across business units to do, at minimum, joining of data sets, to pull together in a centralized, like, be it ad hoc, be it a warehouse, be it a centralized model. It is extended leadership reporting and dashboarding across an organization, not specific to a business unit, because you're not even in today's world, you're not replacing reporting from a business unit, and nor is it the BI team job to go do reporting for everybody in an organization. That's what those champions are for. That's what the business units are for. Fabric should elevate the levels of trustworthy data that team can interact with. But most importantly, that team's job is to be the experts in the organization to drive those really high level objectives and help train members across the organization on how to do things. I.e., hey, Mike, you were the Power BI expert. Now you're the Fabric expert. Even though all these other components were part of your job before, now it's just within this work stream, but you're the admin, you're the owner of all of the data ecosystem, you work with these teams collaboratively. Like, to suggest that team doesn't need to be fully funded and or is just going to magically appear or have these teams cross collaborate with each other to hit these high level objectives, I think is naive.
I think you're missing my point, though, because that's not what I'm saying. You just put words in my mouth that missed, because what I'm not saying is that there's this rogue, now every business, what you're thinking is, well, all the BI engineers are going to lead the central team and there's now no direction, and then the central team is
I'm sorry, that's the picture you were painting for me.
Yeah, but if you read the Microsoft adoption roadmap documentation, they don't recommend that at all. They actually recommended a federated approach. There's a smaller number of lead people at the very top of the Center of Excellence that are being funded by an executive sponsor around BI initiatives. So I would totally agree with you. I would never, in a way, say to throw away these larger BI initiatives, because there is big company organizational goals and directions that they want to go. They have to report on these larger initiatives. However, that central team, I think, is going to focus more on governance and guidance. Again, the guardrails of the road. They are still going to have to convey those main pillars of direction, but in no way are we trying to say we're going to fracture the business and make a lot more smaller business-centric units that are just going to stand alone in their own function. In order for this to work well, you need to have a multitude of kind of individuals, right? We have everyone who touches Power BI is your community of practice. There's going to be Power BI champions that are going to be people that are funded by the business, that are experts in their area, in their data spaces. And then there's going to be the Center of Excellence that is governing, bodying on the top part of this. And so they're setting standards on, and again, I think this is where maybe I do align with you, is the role of that business unit or that central business unit person, that central BI team, where previously it was, we make all the reports, we make all the data, we make all the cubes, you just consume from us. What's happening now is the central BI team is now focusing more on governing, guiding. There's a federated approach where if your business unit wants data from anything central, you have to have a representative, or there's time being shared from your team to that central team.
See, but this is where I don't agree, because now you're talking heavy cross collaboration and shared ownership of resources that have completely different priorities.
And that's regardless, that's going to happen.
Well, no, it's not.
There's going to be different priorities. That's why you have to have that Center of Excellence executive sponsor because they're the ones that are trying to have those cross, they need it, the central, the executive BI sponsor has to go talk to the sales, executive and say, hey, we need to align. We need to understand what is common, what are models, what data do we need to support both teams here? What does the central BI team need to deliver? Either it's just straight tables, or it's models, or it's certified things. And so, this is those executive level individuals are responsible to make sure that the next level down are communicating and working. And, Mark, it sounds like you've had a similar experience with this one, right? So I think it's already trying to occur.
So, and I would agree that I think it's trying to occur, but I think, to me, this complete straight story, there's the one big barrier here that has always occurred when we deal with technology, and we saw it with Power BI. We're going to see it a lot now. It's the technical lack of knowledge. Everything you've said to this point has required a lot of resources, budget, and people that are not just someone out of college. That require a pretty particular skill set and resources devoted to the organization. And most organizations are always hesitant to spend this much on something that they don't know is going to work, or they don't see the final outcome. And especially we're dealing with Fabric, and if we're dealing with people, this 3 to 5 year trend that you said, that I don't think any organization is going to be willing to wait that long. And I don't think if they hire someone who's going to start making mistakes, which in Power BI, I think there's a lot more wiggle room for hiring someone out of college, or a little wiggle room with a report. If you're dealing with data that's now going downstream to other systems, and as soon as there's mistakes, Mike, what have you always said has led people to stop working with Power BI or adopting Power BI?
Stop pulling from Excel.
It's the lack of skill. You've said that how many times when someone has left an organization. And so
what you're doing, but I disagree with you. Yeah. I disagree, because you're talking about skills on people. I'm ignoring that whole concept. I'm ignoring the fact that there's skills on people here, because the idea is everyone's going to have to learn more of this. It's the fact that this tool now exists and that people can turn it on and it's going to be inside organizations. You're going to have to learn it. And I think as we look at, we're not hiring high school students, or we're not hiring fresh out of college students to come in and do this data engineering thing from the central BI team.
You're going to have to learn what?
We're going to take people who are skilled in certain areas right now, DBAs, SQL, those efforts right now, right? I don't think it's a major leap to go from, I used to write a bunch of store procedures to now I'm writing notebooks.
Yeah.
So I'm saying we're going to take people that are already skilled and educated in very data-centric things. All we're doing is shifting some of the mindset. I mean, can I teach a SQL DBA how to use Lakehouse and Mendelian architecture? Of course I can. Is that going to be a multi-year process? No, it's not.
No.
So I think what I'm saying is this is the role of what Power BI. So the technology is now pushing people to be able to educate themselves more in different areas. We're now going to need less management of the infrastructure, the piece, like literally before Fabric, it was, I got to figure out how to roll things out in Azure. Yeah. I may need dev test prod. How's that going to work? I have this blob storage account thing, but I have one of them. What happens if I have data in a different region? How do we see? There's a lot more technical challenges that were there, and Microsoft showed up and said, hey, here's Fabric. I'm going to give you this thing called OneLake. And now we can say on a user by user, we're giving you a platform as a service, as opposed to software as a service with the other elements here. And I think what I'm seeing the shift in, the fact that the technology has changed, we have to fundamentally rethink where are our skills and talents today? What do we think the skills and talents need to be for tomorrow? And then does that in any way realign what does central BI look like versus what BI looks like in the business units? Now, I'm not disagreeing. There's still going to be friction. There's still going to be directional challenges across where the organization is going. There's going to be departmental, goals and objectives. But what general trends, I think you're going to see that central BI team moving more away from creation and moving more into governing and education. And that raises the ship up. And this is where I would say this tide raises all ships across the organization.
Well, but does it, right? So my point, a couple of things. So one is, I do agree with you. I think with the advent of Fabric, right, there's a new ecosystem that people can play in, and business can leverage it in different ways. So over time, right? And if I don't think right now, like I'm over time as Fabric is out here, as business units start to understand it and pick it
Yep.
up, does it mean that there's opportunities for people we would term business people, business users that use Power BI to elevate, right? Elevate
Yes.
into being much more engineering specific. And hey, with Copilot, maybe it's even easier than before. Like as that gets implemented across,
That's true too. Yeah.
Does that leave the organization open for some huge errors in cost? Absolutely, it does. Right? Like it does, because these are people who have no idea what they're playing with. Over time, fine, that's great, right? The other interesting thing, as you were talking though, is I don't think this is a tie like that rises all ships. Like, I think somebody made a comment in chat earlier about IT, right? Does this actually dismantle further any strongholds of data ownership of old school IT business units? And maybe Mike, this is the point you're making where like those teams start to shrink because like this opens the door where if I'm a business unit owner and I know or have heard that Fabric gives me all these things, and I guarantee salespeople are pushing this.
Oh, totally.
What it means is I need more technical resources in my area that I didn't have to pay for before.
Exactly right.
So you're moving like
the builders, the creators,
people out of a technical space and putting them in business units.
Correct.
And like I like I said, I think that's fine, with the exception that there should still be an overall strategy where you're still going to need the same level of maybe not volume of people if you're distributing that workload, but then there's just so many ramifications of that decision, like separating it out, because that's saying like, hey, finance, you now own all of your stuff. And by the way, not only are you running your business unit, we need you to start building these data sets for the organization. And when you're done, you need to hand it off to this team.
Not even hand off.
That is a high priority, or they need to be able to plug into it.
So that's more. Yeah. So that's where I'm more thinking this is going to be irrelevant, right? So finance team should own all the financials of the company. That's totally true. But what happens when the sales team says, hey, we need some better financial data? What does that look like? We need better sales data. What's occurring here, from that perspective? Now, this is where I think the challenges, again, I think there's going to be more challenges in this approach now because, some of the barriers to things I would do in Power BI is I wouldn't want to use data flows for very large data sets. I wouldn't want to use, APIs, calls, getting data into a place was much more challenging with Power BI versus using a pipeline, right? So there's an unlimited amount of information that you can learn on the internet. And my argument here is now that the learning cost is now purely a time function as opposed to more of a I need to pay for training. There's an education level that you need to get here. Like I don't think you need to go out and go get a computer science degree to go become a data engineer.
No, but at the same time though, and this is what I was saying, there's a little more leeway with making mistakes in a report, unfortunately, because it was at the end of the stream with a Power BI report. If I'm doing things in Fabric, it's probably going to, and I'm assuming to your world or the world that we're speaking at right now, the Fabric engineering that we're doing, and this was actually going to one of my questions, the Fabric engineering that's going to be conducted is going to live outside of just a report. The end goal is going to be talking to other systems because it can live in a lakehouse or a database,
sure,
etc. Yep. And that's the goal. So the implications of a mistake, of something breaking or being inaccurate, is much more severe than just a Power BI report. And the willingness to accept a mistake that I can do on the fly in Power BI, I think it's going to be a lot smaller. So yeah, part of learning is making mistakes. I agree. And that's been the great part of Power BI.
But I think in this new world, though, we at least have the ability now to let people experiment and try more things. And I think this is where I'm saying with this added capability that we're bringing to the business, we need better controls or guardrails around what data is really certified, what data has a process to follow, right? We are no longer, like, the fact that we've been in this space so far, all this has done is just added more opportunities for us in this space, in my opinion.
So who assigns the certified data then? Is it the business or is it the centralized BI?
So this is a great question. who is the one that does the certification, right? If you're talking about a
a
federated COE, meaning there are a couple people that are from the central BI team and there are individuals or representatives from the different business units, I think the COE should be the team that is certifying data sets. Now, the Center of Excellence team should define what is the process, and this is an agreed upon pattern that the organization leans on, right? For example, a certified data set can't be getting data from Excel files. It's too finicky. It's going to break too often. That does not make sense, right? A certified team should say we should have some level of data ops along these certified data sets. So how do we check? How do we verify what comes out of the source system actually matches what's in the report? Those are the kind of questions I think the Center of Excellence team needs to address. And when the financial data becomes an important topic for the business, because the data that team is working on is strategically valuable to the entire organization. So I really do think like that team needs to, they're building value, they're adding value to their information, and likely the knowledge that they're building into that data needs to be shared across the organization. The Center of Excellence, or that central team, is the team that's working with that finance team and saying, okay, let's review, how do we certify things? What are the guardrails we're going to put in place here? Is the data modeled correctly? Does the performance of the model work well? And as we grow up that model, right, the central team is working with that team to then figure out how do we certify that data set and distribute it out. And then there's, again, a lot of this is, again, governance piece. You could say, I'm going to give you just reports. I'm going to give you a cube, a data model or data set, or I'm going to give you access to flat files or tables that exist there. So to me, these are layers of depth closer to the raw portion of the data that are now available to us that we never had before.
If you have the right resources, if you have a CDO, and I think organizations are going to require, or they're going to be flying by the seat of their fabric pants.
No, so that fabric's on fire.
The fabric's on fire. But I think this is going to require a CDO to understand what the investment is, because everything you said would work.
That's executive.
If you had the investment,
CDO, executive sponsor, same thing in my mind. It's fine.
I think it's going to require the devotion of a CDO, not just a sponsor. But I think everything you said would work if you had an organization that's willing to invest that much resource and time. Because again, I don't think an organization will be willing to say, oh no, this is the requirement. The requirement to most organizations is going to be the investment in the cost they see on a sheet of paper, that whatever I pay for fabric every month or whatever I'm paying for the engineering.
More than that.
And
it's more. I guess.
I know, but I'm saying their understanding of what the investment's going to be that we're going to need, which kind of what you made sound almost is a hub and spoke approach, just in a different way.
I mean, organizations can choose how they want to roll this out all day, right? You can do Power BI multiple different ways. You can roll out Power BI with a central team or a federated approach. There's a central team that will have hub and spoke approaches, or you can roll it out as a fully centralized team. No one touches anything and everything goes through central BI. That's fine too. That's a choice in the organization. There's also the approach of we don't have any central BI and it's all business led. All business just runs their own stuff. So you can take multiple approaches. I think there are costs and there are implications of going down each path. Not saying any one of them is wrong. I would say, in my opinion, if I'm going to pay for an organization, I'm going to focus on trying to efficiently, right? So again, I'm cheap. so right, I'm not saying just spend money to spend money. I'm very cheap. And what I would prefer my organization would be is I want all the business units or all the functions of my team with data to run as efficiently as possible. And I want to enable people as quickly as I can to build their own elements that make their business unit run. Because the last thing we cannot do anymore, it doesn't afford us, is to restrict access to data.
And that's probably the most cost. Probably has the most cost, but probably the best quality.
I'm not sure I agree with that statement, but I would say the amount of time we spend on people picking up data out of one Excel file and moving it to another file and doing some transformations is probably way underestimated in your organization.
Oh no, I would agree with that, but I think when we're dealing farther upstream now, the severity of a mistake is it's much more severe to make a mistake now upstream compared to something in Excel.
Correct.
and we can't be willing to make these oopsies. Oh no, your quota is actually completely wrong this month. Sorry, guy. We're learning a new technology, and I'm just learning this medallion approach. Sorry that your quota is off this month.
Well, I don't think that would be. I don't think. Well, I would hope that organizations wouldn't go that shoot from the hip and just light up Fabric and just say just go build stuff, right?
Get ready to be disappointed.
I think. I mean, if you're so things that are important to organizations are your revenue, right? And then those bonuses or benefits that go back to organizations and people. And every organization that I've been in that has any sort of benefit paid on performance kind of scenario, they're not just whipping those out the door and sending them away. There's lots of people reviewing them. There's lots of people at the executive leadership approving the process of what that is. And again, I think your example is a bit naive in the fact that your example is, yes, you're right, people won't just change your benefits halfway through. But however, because there is certain level of data in your organization is more important than others. That is a very important data set, I would say. And so there's going to be much more rigor naturally put upon the organization to make sure that that data is right.
Yes, I took an extreme example to make an impactful point.
But I understand.
No, I agree with, I agree. But I also would say there's a lot of organizations too who still don't have the resources that they need in Power BI. And they're shooting from the hip too, unfortunately.
I mean, again, I'm not going to disagree with you.
Yes.
I think you're right. But again, I'm looking at this going, so as I work with organizations, I look at them and going, we don't have the skills we need on this team today currently to do what we want to do. With Fabric, we just added a whole new realm of things we need to know and learn that we already have people who can't even open up like PowerBI.com and correctly navigate to reports in our organizations. So, what's the expectation that's going to happen from the organization on, we have a whole lot more education that needs to be provided into the organization around all this stuff. This is a whole new world that people are trying to figure out.
I had a question. So those same people though, like, and this is where I just push back, or where I'm pessimistic about how many people are from a business unit are just going to adopt this, because if they're not doing reporting right now, if they already have struggles with challenges of people engaging, of doing all these things right now, to find a Power BI champion is a miracle and a great thing in an organization. Every business unit doesn't have one. And then to elevate them into engineering level things, dude, okay, yes, it's possible. I guess my question to
what they want to
kind of close though, that I've been thinking about is maybe there's a different sort of opportunity here where if there is a larger centralized BI team, that we Fabric gives an opportunity for us to clearly demarcate a business unit and ownership of data work streams to support their own reporting, as well as be a source for all of the upstream data sources that we would need. Maybe the opportunity is to not dismantle a central BI team, but put one of the engineers in each of these workspaces so that collectively, their job is work with and support to deliver reporting like you did for a business unit. But it's not a COE thing. It's not where we're all coming together and figuring out what are the things to do. COE would be hey, now that you're embedded in this business unit, your 30% of your job is still to make sure that we're pulling centralized, cleaned, governed data into our models for these other purposes and training, right? And maybe you just embed those users into the business units to do what you're talking about, Mike, because you can't do a holistic hey, blow out, we're going to train everybody how to use Fabric when
I agree.
The engagement just isn't going to be there, as opposed to integrating or sticking your fingers into these business units with the overall objective of hey, down the road, here's how we're going to get engaged or pull more people into this, as opposed to kind of push down informational messaging.
And I think, Mike, I'll end on a question. I love that for both of you. Is everyone ready for Fabric, or is there a certain part of the maturity skill or levels where that you can tell where? And I think that's maybe the question.
So I'll answer your question quickly because we got to kind of wrap here. So I would say first and foremost, everyone's not ready for Fabric. And I will say also a lot of traditional IT roles are going to be challenged with Fabric. So a lot of people that have been a traditional business intelligence team, this Fabric thing is really going to push them to need to learn more and different things. And so this, I clearly see the skills of data people trying to shift. And for one, for every one data engineer or data modeler, we're going to have 3 to 5 report builders. For every 3 to 5 report builders, we're going to have 10, 100, I don't know, a larger number of people just consuming reports. So to say everyone in the entire organization needs to understand Fabric, the answer is no. I don't think that's the scenario here. But I think what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what those centralized roles around data engineering looks like, and figuring out how to best leverage our current resources, upskill them, so they're able to use this new thing called Fabric, and hopefully get all these teams to kind of work together. And again, I think the important thing, or the thing that I feel like is missing most here, is the pattern of governance. There is the missing part of this that I see. The technology is changing, but the governance is not as clearly well defined from Microsoft, and there's more articles coming out from them that are helping with this. But I think this is more of a nuanced area that it will vary between different organizations on what they feel is comfortable or not comfortable with what they do with their data. So,
and I'll ask both of you, Seth, too. Could you identify theoretically on the maturity levels on the adoption roadmap where someone could potentially be a prime candidate or better suited for Fabric?
I would totally read through the deployment roadmap. And I think the deployment roadmap will have to change in lieu of Fabric now too, because there's going to be new 100%. Areas. Yeah, there's going to be new areas that are going to be exposed now by using this tool. Now, a lot of the Fabric, a lot of the roadmap addresses 3 things. It addresses your people, technology, and your process. And so you're going to continue to invest in those areas and figure out what's the best mix of those things for your organization. So I think this was a really good conversation. I know we're at time now, so I want to just kind of wrap here and say thank you all very much for hanging in there in the chat while we've been fervently arguing around these roles and where they belong, and where who's going to spend what's a central team going to look like or not look like in the future. But regardless, I think we can all agree everything is going to adjust. There's going to be new patterns evolving here. And so we all need to stay kind of in tune and connected to what's happening either from Microsoft or what the technology does. And we're going to kind of figure it out. There may be different answers to this question as we move forward, which I think we definitely had different opinions about that here. Tommy, where else can we find the podcast?
You can find it anywhere it's available, Apple and Spotify. Make sure if you have a topic that you want us to talk about or argue about, make sure to go to powerbi.tips and leave it / the podcast. And you can leave a mailbag question. Also, join us live Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually on the same channel, on the same stream.
So we don't have any technical issues.
7:30 a.m. Central.
All right, barring no technical issues for next time, we'll see you next week. Thank you all.